And good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated economist here. So the GDP numbers came in 3.2% GDP as opposed to everybody's estimates of 2.5. Just smoked the estimates. And of course, Kudlow came out. This is the economic advisor to the Trump administration. He came out saying that we need to drop interest rates in order to keep this economy rocking and rolling. And of course, you know, the first thing that I think of is like who it is that's going to take out more debt. You got 90-day delinquency, record 90-day delinquency on auto loans, record delinquency on credit cards, record delinquency on student loan debts. Real estate is off the charts. Who's going to take out the debt, right? Who is it that's going to take out enough debt in order to stimulate this economy? So that's one question that I ask you guys. And then the other one is, if you look at the Federal Reserve right now, and you got the economy rocking and rolling, okay? The Federal Reserve, for quite some time now, for quite a few months, has maintained interest rates at 2.25% and 2.5%. They have been unwinding their balance sheet. They are going through quantitative tightening right now. Regardless of what you hear out there, when you hear the Federal Reserve did a 180, they did not. They stalled out and they continue to unwind their balance sheet. They are actually still doing a quantitative tightening process, so they have not done a 180. A 180 would have meant that they went back into quantitative easing. And they haven't done that, although Kudlow would love for that to happen. So what is going on over at the Federal Reserve? Typically, the Federal Reserve would maintain the federal fund rate, okay, which is an arbitrary number. It's as if they wrote it on the wall, as if they went 2.25 and 2.5. That's the number, guys. Shoot for that. And what that number is that they're shooting for the effective fund rate. And the effective fund rate is the rate of big banks, like the JP Morgans and Goldman Sachs of the world, when they do a lending to each other on an overnight process. So at the end of the day, some of them are going to have reserves and some of them are going to be in need of reserves. And the ones who have it lend it to the ones who need it. The ones in that overnight rate is called the effective fund rate. Now, recently, the Fed came out and says we are operating in an abundant reserve system, or also known as the floor system. So nobody really understood that, so I went and checked it out. And the best I can describe it is that the big banks now had filled up with their reserves and they didn't need to lend it to any of the other banks. And so they kept it at the Federal Reserve. And so the interest on excess reserves at the Federal Reserve was maintaining this Fed fund rate. And so they had two tools that they had over there. They had the reverse repo rate, the overnight reverse repo rate, and they had this interest on excess reserves. And now just recently, if you go and look, the effective fund rate has gone to 2.44%, which is just shy of the 2.5%, the upper range of what the Fed fund rate is. So if the Fed fund rate is at 2.5 and that effective fund rate goes over it, the Fed is essentially losing control of the Fed fund rate, okay, or the effective fund rate, which is supposed to be maintained inside of that Fed fund rate, which is 2.25% to 2.5%. So that's my other question. If the Federal Reserve is going to continue to unwind their balance sheet until September, how is it that they are going to maintain that effective fund rate without either one, raising the interest rates, right? Raising the Fed fund rate to a higher rate so that the effective fund rate can go back into their channel that they want to maintain, right? Why wouldn't you? It's a rockin' and rollin' economy. Or in the face of a rockin' and rollin' economy, you say, hey, you know, even though the rockin' and rollin' economy has taken place, despite that, we're going to go ahead and start stimulating the economy. Tell me, what does that do to the sentiment of the people? Uneducated economists, you let me know.